So what's your favorite UFO case? Is it one of the familiar cases or one of your own experiences? Jason Gleaves is a researcher and author who has penned a fascinating book titled UFO Encounters Up Close and Personal. And in it, he features about 50 of the world's leading UFO researchers, and each one of them cite their favorite case. And Jason's here to talk about that book. Hi, Jason, how are you?
Hi there. I'm okay, thank you. It's always a pleasure to do these podcasts and shows with everybody.
Good to have you here. So what gave you the idea for UFO Encounters?
Well, this book was the third book that I've done. The first, obviously, is what I do mainly, is the digital analysis of images and footage for people from all over the world. And then I really wanted to get a book out to show people how to go about analysing photographs for themselves. You know, it's not secret. You know, anyone can do it. You know, and like I said, it's no secret that I use Photoshop and I use the filters within Photoshop to highlight and bring into detail a lot of the stuff you can't see physically, you know, within images and footage anyway. And then that was called UFO Photo. And then the second book I did was the ufology umbrella. And that was mainly sort of the next step, where I go into the 7 separate categories of close encounters. So it's 1 to 7, obviously, right through. The obvious ones, you know, 1, 2, and 3 are where up to the close encounters of the third kind. That's where Dr. Hynek, you know, he brought that one in.
Yep. And
again, with the famous Steven Spielberg movie, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But then obviously there are more, you know, that have come in lately, where you've got C5, where there's a more famous sort of person that goes to do those sort of things, those, you know, to go out and actually look for ETs, Dr. Stephen Greer, you know, etc., people like that. And then this book was just probably the next stage, really. It was, you know, walking on from there, where throughout ufology, I've been very lucky and, you know, quite humbled that a lot of people I've encountered in ufology, especially in our community, you know, they've become good friends. And, you know, when we analysing images for them or whatever it is for. And I basically just wanted to know how they got into ufology, what dragged them into ufology. Was it kicking and screaming like most of us, or was it, you know, pretty much, you know? And, you know, I just said, you know, would you like to contribute towards the book? And, you know, and lucky enough, most people came forward, you know, if they had the time, you know, and they would actually come forward. And it ranges right through, you know, from ufologists, you know, known, and, you know, some not so well known, and then you've got researchers and broadcasters and musicians, and, you know, right through the broad spectrum, really. And if you actually go in, there are, you know, there's a lot of famous cases in there for obvious reasons, but then there's also cases in there that people have never heard about before, you know. And even myself, you know, I was, you know, quite taken back. And then with each case that somebody come forward with, I do a brief description so the reader could get to know that person, you know, what they do, what books they wrote, etc. And then obviously the case that got them involved, and then I would do the illustrations and everything I could do towards that myself, to try and bring that story to life a bit more for the reader. And if there was photographs or images available, I would use those as well, you know, in the book, to obviously bring that up forward again. So yeah, it's basically just that. And I'm presently I'm working on a graphic novel with Calvin Parker, who was one of the 2 people abducted. We know now there is actually more people that were abducted at the time, but the initial 2 were Calvin Parker and Charlie Hickson at the Pascagoula, Mississippi, in the early 70s. And I've basically been working with Calvin for last year, maybe, and through Philip Mantle, the British ufologist. I'm sure a lot of you listeners know of him. You know, he's a great friend and mentor to me as well. And there's a writer in the States, Martin Powell, who's actually doing the writing for the book.
Right.
And Martin normally does like Batman and Superman type of comics, that
Yep.
type of thing.
Yep.
And basically what I've done, I've gone through with Calvin right the way through, trying to, you know, bring his life leading up to the encounter when he was taken on board. And then obviously with the female ET, everybody knows the other ETs, that, you know, the ugly ones, as he calls them, that, you know, very odd shaped beings with the pointy ears.
Almost robot-like.
That's it, yeah. And but not everybody knows about the female ET on board the craft who they had the interaction with. So I've done like a police e-fit with him, you know, and built up a profile, and then we've actually incorporated, and now people can actually get to see what she looked like on board the craft. But that's out next year for the 50th anniversary. But, you know, this book obviously is more to do with people within ufology and how they got into it.
Yeah. So your background is more, I guess, you know, science-based analysis of cases.
Yeah, well, it started really. If you want, I started in ufology way back, obviously when I was a young child, because I had a sighting with my sister when I was age 7 years old in Liverpool in the UK. And we were basically playing in our grandparents' house upstairs in the bedroom. And we both witnessed a silver disc-shaped object outside the window. It was hovering outside for a while, and then it took off at high velocity. And we just carried on playing as if nothing had happened. And I'd actually forgotten about it. Now, whether that's missing time or anything related to that, you know, we don't know this. And it was only later when I got into ufology again, into more depth and more what I'm doing now. My sister actually reminded me of, you know, the sighting, and said to me one day, you know, do you remember when we saw that craft when we were small outside the window? And I was, oh yeah. And it slowly came back to me, the memories. Obviously through my life, there's been a lot of odd, weird things that have happened, you know. But then obviously I went on, joined the Air Force, and then there was an incident at RAF Cosford, which is, you know, quite documented out there, you know, everyone can read up on it on the internet. And basically there was, we were on base, my friend was the orderly corporal that night in the guard room. It was a normal, basically the base at RAF Cosford is a training camp, so they train armourers and things like that there. And during part of the you know, duties for the airmen at the station is part of gate guard. You have to do gate guard, and there was a young airman on the airfield gate guard at the time. It was really quiet in the guard room. It was getting into the late evening, and suddenly the radio kicked in. With the young airman screaming down the radio to get the guard commander out to the airfield, because something was hovering over the airfield. You know, he was obviously really petrified. Long story short, all the guards, RAF police, everyone got in their vans and Land Rovers and drove out to the airfield guard post. When they got there, they all witnessed this large craft, which was described to be the size of a battleship. It was huge in size, hovering over the airfield, and then it took off at high velocity, but then it went on to another nearby base, RAF Shorebury, which is about 20 miles as the crow flies from Cosford. And it was witnessed there by the on-duty air traffic controller, who got the radar lock, and a craft of similar description as he was coming in over the base. He said it was firing lasers down to the ground if it was actually looking for something. And again, the craft, or a craft of similar description, that evening was seen throughout the UK by on-duty policemen and members of the public. So, you know, it's quite documented. You know, it's all on the internet. You could read up on it. And the MOD released the papers a few years back when they did that mass release of UFO papers. So yeah, there's a lot of weird things that have happened.
Yeah. Well, it always piques my interest, going back to when you were 7 years old, when when someone says they've seen a UFO close up and then they mention the word missing time. Did you ever have any thoughts later in life, perhaps, of having some regression therapy, maybe to go back to that moment and find out what happened?
Yeah. I have actually spoken to Mary Rodwell when she was over in the UK at a conference. I know Mary quite well now through Peter Slattery in Australia, through SETI, and James Gilliland. So everyone's in that close-knit community. We also got to know each other. And Mary was in the UK giving a talk at the Outer Limits conference, the magazine. They gave a conference. So I approached Mary there, as a friend as well, and said, but I just haven't had the time to have a regression done on it, I mean, there was another case not a few years back where long story short, I was walking my two dogs, which I do every day. And it's about 20 minutes, 25 minutes if I do a short walk. If I do a long walk, it's obviously longer. And it's a reservoir, which is at the back of the house where I live. And I was walking along quite happily, with dogs on the lead in front of me. And in the distance, I could hear a Chinook helicopter approaching. And I know the very distinct sound of the helicopter because I used to work on them. So I know what they sound like. And I thought, oh, great, I'll get a photograph, I'll get a video of this flying over because it came straight over my head, really low. So long story short, I can remember filming this video of the Chinook flying right over, the dogs getting excited by because it was that low. It disappeared, and then I just carried on with the walk. When I got home, my wife and my son looked a little bit concerned, and he said, "Where have you been?" And I said, "Well, I've just been on a short walk, which I thought was 20 minutes." So
wow.
They said, "No, you've been gone hour and a half plus. When you said you were only going to be short, and I a bit baffled really." And then we all sort of got on with what we were doing for the rest of the day. And later that evening, I thought, oh, I'll have a look at that footage, of the Chinook. I remember taking it with the video, and I've still got it on my phone, the actual footage. And when I look back at the video, you could actually see all it is in the video is me filming my feet, and you can hear the Chinook flying off in the distance. And I remember filming it as it came over me. Everything was clear as day, but that's the only piece of footage I had left on the actual video, which was a bit strange, high strangeness we call that,
Yeah. Jason, talking about, cases for the book, did you actually put a section in on your favorite case?
Yeah. Well, at the front, I gave the introduction as you do with the book, etc. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to put a case in there. I went through, and there is a lot of cases I could have put in this book, but the one I actually put in was just one that really stood out. It's the real War of the Worlds, I call it, because the craft in the pictures that I analysed, where that's what they look like. They look like the craft of that movie. And basically it was on the 15th of August 1972, and it was two university students, about 19 years old at the time, I think they were, in Japan, and they were out taking photographs of, there was an active volcano where they were, and obviously a great example to get photographs of. And they took 6 separate photographs, and they actually witnessed the craft. In the book, you can see the photographs and where I've analysed them, but you can see the craft actually over the volcano that's active. You can see all the smoke coming up, and it's firing laser beams down to within the actual volcano itself. So it's just one that really grabbed me, and and very interesting. And it was on the old 35mm, not pre-digital cameras. So yeah, I just thought it'd be a really good one to put in there.
Okay, so the people that you've assembled, and it's basically like an all-star cast. You mentioned some famous cases, but did most of them actually cite their own individual cases, or did they pick one that they found fascinating? Say, for example, you know, like Travis Walton or Pascagoula or you know, any one of those.
Well, like you say, the Travis Walton, obviously the Fire in the Sky, famous movie, you know, done of that case. And I did approach Travis, but he was busy; he couldn't do the thing. But I actually got Mike Rogers, who was the driver of the
Mm-hmm.
7-team logging team that encountered the UFO. And I can remember talking to Mike and saying to him, you know, I'd like you to put a piece in the book, and he kept saying, no, surely you need to speak to Travis. You know, it was his case, sort of thing. And I said, no, I want your account. You were the driver of the people. You were in charge of the
Yeah.
group, the logging team. You know, you took off when you thought Travis was killed or, you know, injured by the UFO. You're the one that went back. And I wanted his account of it, you know, in that respect. And he was sort of quite taken that I wanted to get him involved in that respect.
Yeah.
Which would be great. Everybody knows Travis's story, you know, if
Mm-hmm.
they've watched him or seen him on stage, you know, giving the talk. But the other people involved were just as important as Travis at the time. So, you know, a little bit of a twist on the story, you know.
Yeah, and Mike's a pretty shy and retiring type too. So did you get much out of him?
Yeah, he actually gave me quite a good, you know, write up, you know, of what actually happened, you know, in his own words, what when they pulled up, but you know, pretty much on par what Travis said, you know, because they all saw the same thing, but in it, you know, he said it looked like a Ferrari sports car, you know, the craft, and which gives you that impression in your mind. You're thinking about, wow, it must have been a fantastic, you know,
Mm-hmm.
looking machine hanging there, and then he said about the even down to the smell in the air, you know, like a static smell, and the hum as he got closer to it, all the things that you don't really think about, but you know, with anything related to an encounter, it draws you in. You want to read more, you know.
Yeah, yeah. So your case and Mike's contribution what were some of the more remarkable cases that you were given? You know, either famous or ones we may not have heard about.
Well, you like you said, there was so many people, and I've been so lucky to have so many people take part, and everybody's case or account or story or you know whatever it is that's in there is just as important because it all brings it's the community thing, you know. But you know, got Malcolm Robinson. I don't know if you've spoken to Malcolm
Not
before. He's
yet, no.
Scottish ufologist. You know, great guy. But he actually was involved in a case called the Detchmont Woods case. And in the UK, if you look in the book, I've done the illustration of the UFO, and basically it was during 1979, and it was a forest worker who knew the woods very well, where he had the experience. He was 61 years, Robert Taylor, and he encountered a spherical shaped craft, which is very unusual because you don't. It's more nowadays that you actually see more spherical
Mm-hmm.
shaped craft, as in orbs, you know, that type of thing. But at the time, in the the late 70s, it was quite a unique shape that people were seeing. And he came across anyway, and this thing was hovering in the woods, and two little smaller objects came out from the bottom of the larger craft. And he actually described them, they looked like limpet mines, you know, the old Second World War limpet mines, that type of thing.
Yep.
And the thing about this case is they attacked him. They actually attacked him, and they actually tore his trousers, and they were, you
Wow.
know, whether he was abducted or not, we don't know, but you know, he was definitely attacked. But the thing about this story is that it was actually reported to the UK police and actually brought forward as an assault charge. It's the only one in existence in the UK that is still known to this day as an extraterrestrial assault charge.
Wow.
So it sort of stands out, and again, it's a great story. And if you ever listen or hear Malcolm's talk anywhere, he always takes those. He's still got the actual trousers today, and he takes them with you, and you can actually hold them and have a look, and you can see the tears in the legs, of the trousers. So
yeah, did he get the trousers analyzed?
I think he did, and also he was one of somebody else who went out the next day to the actual scene, and they actually saw the scorch marks on the ground and everything. They got quite an awful lot of evidence from that case. So, for him to bring that one forward, that was a big one for Malcolm, because it obviously affected him greatly.
Yeah, yeah. I noticed. I went through a lot of the names. One of the guys I've spoken to several times here is Kevin Briggs, and talks about the Council of Eight. I always find that fascinating.
Yeah. He's a great guy, Kevin, isn't he? He's an ex-police officer himself, isn't he? From the UK, he lives in Florida now. And I've got to know Kevin. Like everybody else, I'm honoured to know everybody. It's a privilege for me. And his case, he goes right through where he was in the bath as a young child, and two beings visited him while he was in the bath, and
Yep.
And they were talking about him as if they already knew who he was, and that leads into the sighting he had with his wife. And I actually analysed the photograph. He had an actual photograph that is in the book, and I analysed that, put that in the book for him. So yeah, Kevin's just one of many again who came forward and stood up to the plate and gave me a really good account.
Yeah. So when you analyze, photos and vision, are there times when they're a fake, or are they usually real?
No, I try to approach every job or analysing of a photograph, or whether it be footage, in the same way. I always do the sort of Sherlock Holmes type of way. I always try to have a chat with the person who's obviously presenting the evidence, the photograph. Try to get to know a little bit about them, what they do, if they're interested in ufology, that type of thing. Because not everybody is. It's just something that's happened to them. And then I also try to get where they live, so their surroundings, so whether they live near airports or military bases, etc. Anything that could give another reason for something they've seen.
Yep.
And then you go in, and I'll see a bit of nighttime sighting. Then you would actually go and look at the apps that are available. I think one's called Heavens Above, which is a free app. And it actually tells you where the satellites are at the time,
Right.
anytime, whether they've flown over, and aircraft apps as well. So you can eliminate an awful lot of things before you actually go in and start looking at them. And then if you look at the actual footage itself, you can, sometimes they look like birds straight away, you can actually see. But if you go in using the Photoshop and using the filters to bring in and invert the photograph, so it turns it into sort of a negative, and actually you can see more detail that way, and then using different filters and overlay them as well.
Yeah.
And also you could also get the person to get a photograph taken in. If it was a nighttime shot, you get a daytime shot from the same location, and then you can physically overlay the two together if there's anything caught within that original photograph, maybe a building or a tree, so that will still be there. So it's great for perspective. You can get perspective on the object. So you're basically trying to eliminate everything else first, and down to aircraft, whether you saw strobe lights or landing lights. There's so many things that you can eliminate, and then you can start to go in, and then you whittle it down to a very small percentage, where at the end of the day, it still becomes an unknown, because what UFO stands for, isn't it? Unidentified flying object. It's still an object, it's flying, but it's just unidentified until it's identified.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, where I'm in Florida, we're sandwiched in between two big Air Force bases here, and there's always, you know, aircraft in the sky doing maneuvers and whatnot. And I've lost count of actual UFO sightings that I've made here personally. It's pretty much a hotspot. But the other night, and I can see how people can be easily fooled. Um, this light appeared in the sky with red and green strobe lights on it, and it was zigzagging all over the place. And I thought, wow. So I grabbed my phone and I started taking, and we're on a marina where I am,
Mhm.
and I watched this thing for about 5 or 6 minutes, and all of a sudden it from a height it just plummeted really fast, and then just came in and landed on the marina, and I kind of rubbed my eyes and grabbed my binoculars and had a look, and it was a drone. So I'd
Yeah,
been watching a drone for almost 10 minutes.
yeah. And again, it's an easy, not a mistake to make, but it's again, you're looking at something you can't comprehend what you're looking at. You can't actually recognize what it is,
Yeah.
and that even goes down to, like I've said before to other people, if it's a secret covert sort of object, a military secret covert aircraft that you've never seen before, it's going to instantly be a UFO, because you don't know. It doesn't look like a conventional aircraft or helicopter, and a
Yeah.
drone. I've got a drone myself. I fly a drone, and they look completely different. They don't look like an airplane. They don't look like a helicopter, but they've
Mm-hmm.
still got the actual strobe lights. If
Yep.
you've got those.
Yep.
So yeah, and then you've got weather phenomenon, that can fool people. The lenticular clouds that people
Mm-hmm.
see,
Yep.
and they just look like huge mothership UFOs, but it's just the formation of the clouds.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, there are people that, and I've had plenty of images that I've analysed, where there have been craft within clouds, so they're using clouds as camouflage, or to not be seen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Uh, well, let's say UFO, a real craft from outer space, I generally thought would not wouldn't have the strobe lights. Would that be correct in saying that?
You wouldn't have thought so. The whole explanation for strobe lights on an aircraft, it's basically to do with the civil aviation law, international civil aviation. Strobe lights are there so that aircraft can be seen. That is the whole point of a strobe light. They're there so other aircraft can see that aircraft, and there's
Yeah.
not collision. There's no other explanation for that. So, if it's extraterrestrial, why would it have a strobe light? Or
Mm-hmm.
if does it actually want to be seen? In that.
Yeah.
But then again, there are military aircraft that will fly on exercises and etc., where they won't have strobe lights on. They'll just
Yep.
be black.
Yep.
So again, you've got to look at the facts and the evidence and try and come up with a conclusion to what's
Yeah.
going on around you.
Yeah. You spoke earlier about how people become involved or interested in ufology. Was there a common theme among the people that presented their cases for the book that you could tell on how they became researchers and investigators?
Um, it's not really a common, because there's quite a wide variety of reasons that people got involved. There are people that have had the abductions. They've seen abductions, like Mike, for instance. And then there's people have had sightings, but then there's also people that not necessarily just had sightings, but they've been brought up a bit like myself, as where I was reading old UFO books and magazines, and watching all the TV shows, because there was no internet round when we were younger. You had to go to a library to get your books, or you were gifted a book as a present, or
Mm-hmm.
you got the. So that's how you sort of got your information. Not like today, where it's on tap,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
But throughout the book, you can see that I've tried to, well, I haven't tried. It just happened the way it did. People approach with their case or what happened, you know, but a bit like Kathleen Marsden, you know, she's in the book.
Hmm.
Um, and she's a, you know, a fantastic researcher, ufologist herself in her own right, you know, but she's the niece of
Betty and Barney Hill.
Betty and Barney Hill, who again is a famous case. But she writes about actually sitting in the room when Betty and Barney are talking about the abduction in the family, you know,
Wow.
not out in public. So that's what's got her attention. You see, it's something that's happened within the family, and you know, even down in my family, I mean, I had obviously things have happened to me, but it wasn't that long ago. My father's ex-military as well, and he actually sat down one day when I'm having a beer with him, and he actually said to me, I had a man in black experience when I was a young boy in Liverpool in the 1950s. He was basically playing at home, um, and it was before everybody had TV, so it was a radio in the house. People listened to the radio, and he was running up and down in the hallway into the living room, backwards and forwards. And he said he ran back into the hallway this time, and as he looked down the end where the front door was all locked up for the evening, he ran through the front door, and he said a black, dark being manifested itself right through the front door, and it
Wow.
stood in the doorway, and and he said he didn't know, and this figure beckoned him to follow him up the stairs, which was nearby, and it went up. He did an about turn, ran back into the front room to
Hmm.
the grandparents, and obviously tried to say what he'd seen. They just said, no, you're just imagining it, and all like that. And as I went in with detail and got the detail off him, what this figure looked like, um, I've actually done it in my second book. There's
Hmm.
actually a full thing of it, and it's basically a man in black. And my father has no idea what a man in black is, what anything like that, and he sort of knows what I do, you know, with the books and the ufology and you know and that and what's happened with me. But to him, it was a complete mystery, you know.
Yeah. We've mentioned, some of the cases in the UK, but did you get a sense of particular UFO hotspots, reading some of the cases that were presented? Is there like particular areas around the world that tend to get more UFO activity?
I wouldn't say that. I mean, I think a lot of people that do say there are hotspots, like, you know, they'll go to Florida's a good Gulf breeze, isn't it? You know, and
Hmm.
places like that. In the UK, we've got them, which is Llandudno, which is North Wales in the UK. You know, and they're all situated on ley lines. So whether that's got something to do with it, we don't know. Um, but no, I wouldn't say it's particularly located in certain places. Some places will appear to be more of a hotspot because more people have come forward with sightings. I mean, like James Gilliland at the ESETI Ranch, near Mount Adams. I've done an awful lot of video and photograph analysis for James. And if you go onto his eseti.org web page and everything, it's
Yep.
all there free. You can actually see everything. He doesn't keep anything back. It's basically there, and you can see where I've analysed. And the
Yeah.
same for Peter Slattery in Australia, Peter Maxwell Slattery. I first came across Peter through Mary Rodwell, who was giving him a regression through his experiences. And I put Peter in probably the top 1% in the world for sightings and, you know, for actually bringing evidence forward. And
Yep.
he's got craft, every shape you can think about, from orbs to discs, etc. But then he's got beings as well, you know, in videos where he set up a motion camera in his house, and there's a grey popping round the corner, round the head, round the
Wow.
corner.
Yeah.
But I did a recent documentary with Peter and James and Mary called Multidimensional. I think it's on Amazon Prime and everything, iTunes. And it basically it's through Peter's experience. But there was another experience in there where I can remember speaking with Peter, and he heard footprints going across the roof. And Peter, I always laugh because I'm sure he sleeps with his camera. You know, he's always got his
Right.
camera with him.
Yep.
He said, hang on, I'm just going to go outside, get a photograph. He took a photograph of his truck outside and everything. And when he brought it back in, there's a picture of a grey being standing behind the truck, peering up. But the interesting thing about this, because anyone can actually say that. They could just say, well, and have, you know, the pictures. But when I actually analysed the two separate pieces of footage of the grey, and overlaid them both together, it was perfectly the same being. So on two separate occasions he's had, but then he's got other photographs where I think Guan Yin, I think her name was, where he's having interactions with Pleiadians, you know, the Nordic type of beings.
Yep.
And that, and if you go through there's pictures in there, but you know, he's definitely up there in the top 1%.
Yeah, it's fascinating. What about the famous Calvin photo? Did that get a mention in the book?
No. I mean, it is a famous case, but it's really come more to light within the last week or so. And the Calvin, it's a famous case that is supposed to have been the famous UFO photograph that was on the back of the door in the MOD London offices of a UFO. And it's basically a triangular diamond-shaped craft. I'm sure everybody's seen it by now.
Yeah.
And following it or close by, you can see a Harrier jump jet. It's actually flying nearby. And that was like 30 years ago, and no one could ever find the original. It was done through the, I think it was the Daily Record newspaper in Scotland. And it was backwards and forwards through the MOD. Anyway, long story short, there was 6 photographs taken, and they all disappeared. But I'm sure a lot of people know David Clark over here in the UK, who's actually unearthed the source of the photograph that's out there now, and it's an ex-RAF retired officer, Craig Lindsay, who'd had all this time an actual copy of the original photograph, let's say.
Right.
And that's what's causing the stir now. It's all sort of brought up now because it's always been a myth, this photograph, and now we're actually seeing the photograph for real. It's, you know.
Yeah. The cases cited in the book by those that you know, other than the famous ones, were there any contact cases that they talk about that they experienced?
Well, you got Mary Rodwell. I know we go back to Mary again, but there was a case there that I haven't even heard about, and it was a case, obviously, that got her interested in ufology, and it's called the Chinese Roswell. And again, in the book, you know, long story short, it was like some researchers in Beijing, China, who'd actually come forward to her. And this was a downed UFO that had actually come down in barracks, army barracks within China itself. And they actually retrieved this craft, but they also had dead bodies and a live ET. So it's pretty much like the Roswell case in the States. You know, and they all heard a loud storm at night. They thought it was a storm and a tree coming down, but it was basically the UFO crashing on the actual base itself.
Wow.
But you know, Mary's been in contact with the witnesses who have come forward, and again, it's a case I'd never heard about it, so it was a good one again.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of cases that most of us haven't heard about that people have kept to themselves over the years. I mean, in the last 20 years, I mean, you know, at the turn of the century, I probably would never have thought that would get to this stage as far as coverage of UFOs and aliens, and because everything had been pretty much suppressed. Do you think ufology, the UFO scene, the alien scene has become a little bit polluted in that time?
Well, again, it's the information that you go, it's the road you go down, I should say, really. we're all the same. I call it the Richard Dreyfuss syndrome. You know, the character of Close Encounters, where I'm sure everyone's seen that film.
Yeah.
Where, you know, the character has the sighting, he has the interaction with the ETs, and then he just goes berserk for information, and he doesn't know why, and he builds the mound, you know, Devil's Tower in his front room, and with the potato, you know, the famous the table. So I call it that because everybody goes into that state in some kind of a way where they actually want to go and read books. You know, they'll look at photographs, etc., and they'll maybe watch a YouTube video, but then the information they're getting it's drawing them in, and they actually want to get more and more, and it becomes slightly obsessive, you know, that they want to know more information. But again, you tend to pull towards certain pieces of information yourself. You'll go through one door will close and another three will open. And that's why I called the second book the UFOlogy umbrella, because that was the way I see it, as an umbrella, and everything cascades off into different categories like encounters and you know, all different, you know, aspects of ufology.
Yeah. I like to use the word, I think, normalized. It seems that the whole UFO thing has become a little bit more normalized than, say, it was 20 years ago. I mean, it doesn't it doesn't present that shock and awe factor anymore.
No. But I mean, I've said this before. Again, you know, I tried to go to as many conferences. I'm sure you do. You know, we try to. It's a way of meeting people like yourself. You know, and obviously listening to people and more accounts and, you know, things like that. But when I actually started going, you know, you could actually say it was people used to call it the tinfoil hat people. You know, with the we always had that thing above our head. We were mad, we were crazy, you know, regardless of if anything had happened to you or not, you know. But I've noticed over time, and especially the last few years, the caliber of person going to these conferences has changed vastly. You know, you've got people from all walks of life. You know, you've got solicitors, barristers, chefs, you name it, mechanics. You know, there's people there from every single type of walk of life, and they all want the same thing. They're all going to see the same thing or listen to the same thing.
Yeah. You've no doubt had a chance to analyze all, you know, the video footage released by the US government 5 years ago, and then a couple of times since. I mean, did that strike you as a genuine UFO? I'm talking about the Tic Tac videos.
I did another documentary recently. That was the last one I did, called The Pentagon Files. Again, that's on the usual platforms, but that was done with UK ufologists, and we were all talking about the different aspects of those cases, the Nimitz, the Tic Tac, and everything. And being ex-military myself, I sort of know a bit more in respect of. But when I first saw that footage, I think I was the only sort of person that was actually ringing this out, as you know. But anyway, as you can see with the screen, you've got the UFO, which has been obviously through the gimbal. It's actually taken through infrared, and again. But on the readout within the screen itself, you've got all the data, obviously the altitude and everything the pilot can see. But down one side, there's the word slave. And the only thing that got my attention, I should say, at the time when that came out, is slave in military terms means drone.
Right.
So it was one thing that kept going over and over in my mind. I'm not saying the object was not real. I'm sure there was an actual UFO there, you know, and it was obviously flying extraordinary. It was doing things that, you know, our aircraft can't do. But that was one thing that stood out in my. It still does to today, you know, because again, I look for the other things that other people probably don't look for, and another thing that struck me with that is the quality of the footage. Now, I know damn well that there's better footage out there, you know, of UFOs and like that. I mean, I've got a video out there. I think I've had 350,000 hits on this on my YouTube
Right.
channel,
Wow.
maybe more. It's been used on TV shows, Paranormal Caught on Camera. I think it was on Japanese TV. And it was basically an Argentinian pilot, and he approached me. He'd been seeing UFOs and sightings, but he'd never had a camera with him or anything. This was like 2014. Long story short, he had his mobile phone with him this time, and he knew he was going to see more UFOs. And he did, and the footage starts. It's all on my YouTube channel. Anyone can see this footage. It's there, and I still think it's the best footage out there at the minute. And he's flying along. It's about 10,000 feet, very clear. For it's in the sort of the format of a long view like that because it's taken on a mobile phone. And you see the propeller in front going round. You can hear it. Very clear blue skies with the cloud base. And then he said from his it was his left-hand side, he saw 2 UFOs coming in. So he's still filming, he's still flying the plane, obviously, on his own. And a long, elongated craft flies right in front of his aircraft. And then it's followed by a smaller UFO right behind. And then he said they went to the right-hand side of his aircraft, did a figure of 8 formation, and then came back in a tight formation together and buzzed his aircraft again. And he caught all this. And if you go on and see for yourself, it's amazing footage, and it baffles everybody that sees it because it is what it is. And that was done with a mobile phone in 2014.
Wow.
But what I'm trying to say is that the military have come forward with this Tic Tac and that all this footage related by them, and it's grainy. It's basically rubbish quality, So I just think it could have been better, a lot better.
Yeah. For those of us that have been following this for so long and putting up with a lot of the suppression of information, I don't know. I need to be convinced that their motive is honest, and I keep thinking there's an ulterior motive.
Yeah. Well, there is, depending again which angle you're coming at ufology from. Whether you can look at it from a military point of view, like me, sort of thing, or and then the civilian side, the way they look at it. The military are probably always going to try and militarize any tech they get, because that's why they want to re-engineer any crash, and beings. They want information.
Yeah.
They'll always class it as a threat before anything else. When on the opposite side, I remember the public will look at it as a peaceful side of a peaceful interaction, which is probably more of what it is,
Yeah. Jason, just one last question. Do you think we're closer to disclosure than we were, say, 10, even 20 years ago?
In that respect, yeah, but I would say disclosure has already happened. It happened,
I agree.
A long time ago. The proof is there in the evidence we've got, as in footage and people just basically talking about experiences. We don't need the government to tell us that they're already here. We know. We're talking about it now. We know, and your listeners know they're already here. So I don't know why people they feel they need the government to reassure them. Maybe I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're right. The proof is there in the millions upon millions of experiences around the world that talk about this, and there's probably millions and millions that have kept stuff to themselves. So that's where the proof is. Jason, so the book's been out for a few months now, UFO Encounters Up Close and Personal, and the new book coming out next year. Yeah,
that'll be the Calvin Parker book.
Yep.
I'm not sure what the title is yet, but it's to do with the 50th anniversary of the Pascagoula case.
Yeah, it's coming
and
up.
that's through Philip Mantle as well, because he's had an awful lot to do with it, with Calvin, with his book and everything.
Yeah, that'll be I think October 2023, or I think it'll be 50 years since that that event took place.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Jason, thanks very much. Always a pleasure to talk to you. We'll have to have you on again, hopefully leading up to the release of the new book.
Yeah, that's been great. Like I said, I always really enjoy these shows because we talk about what we want to talk about.
Fantastic. Nice to meet you and talk with you.
Thanks a lot. Bye now.
Jason Gleaves joining us today.